We are students of the art of play,
And we do this show called The Art of Play.
a show for the players who ask why.
I'm Vi.
And I'm Gaia.
Hey Gaia, what are we talking about today?
So today we're going to try to move a bit away from our standards for the past few weeks. We've been talking a lot about TTRPGs, we talked a lot about video game design. Today we want to really talk about board games, the third category from when we first made the show that we never got into.
Mm-hmm. It's a little bit difficult because they don't kind of fit our nice little narrative arc, right? Because I think video games, as we've talked about before, and tabletop RPGs kind of marry narrative and game mechanic in a really fun way. And not to say that tabletop board games don't, but they do it in a fundamentally different way that you don't always sort of see or interact with.
Not to mention that just our access to analysis of it isn't as good as with our other media. We kind of picked our favorites and rolled with it. So
yeah, I don't think that we're really board game people. However,
someone with us is. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's David. I've been playing board games since I can literally remember. It's been since I was born, and I'm still doing it, still buying new ones, still having a great time with it. And I've advanced with that in the way that I have started painting the minis myself. So I'm partial to miniature board games, but I also have played pretty much every one you've ever heard of. I started with Carcassonne and Catan, and now we're at Tapestry and Scythe, and the board game world is really advanced further on, and it makes me very excited that I get to actually talk about these things, because this is a really interesting concept.
Awesome. And you also stream on Twitch, right? What's your app?
I don't anymore, actually. I stopped streaming on Twitch for painting, but we did start streaming our Cyberpunk game, so if you go to twitch.tv/cyberpunkbutterflyeffect, it should be there. Maybe every Thursday, who knows? It kind of depends on the day.
Cool.
So today we're looking at getting really into the general overview of the game design found within the board game world, and to really ask the question, why should we care? What's kind of the big picture of why we care about board games as much as we could care about video games and TTRPGs? So if you don't mind, I can start this conversation off with just a question of what is the difference in terms of design between board games and maybe what you look at video games? What makes board games special?
Well, to start off, that's just a really difficult question to answer, because video games, in my experience at least, have been, you have one story, you will play out that story, it will always be exactly the same. But in a board game, every single game will be slightly different. So to make it as fair as possible, I think to compare the most similar and then tell their differences apart, there's something called a legacy board game, which is the same board game that you will play multiple times in a row with slightly different stories, or an advancing story or a campaign. That would be the nearest to a video game I could expect. But again, with the replayability thing, is whenever you play a legacy board game, which is, they will bring you cards or stickers or things that you will permanently change about the board or the cards or anything in the game. Think of Seafall or what are the other ones? Charterstone. There's things like that where you'll put stickers on the board and you'll be able to play this once. But for a video game, it'll be, you can play it as many times as you want. So if you like the story, you don't have to buy the whole game again to play it. So that would be something in the video games good kind of section. But for legacy board games, they are actually some of my favorite experiences I've had with my family. Like with Seafall, you just start as you're exploring the ocean with your friends, and it's semi-cooperative, semi-competitive, so you're exploring islands and you're getting resources to upgrade your boats, and then at some point you just discover this lost tomb, and you're like, why is that here? This is supposed to be a thing of history, and then there's monsters, and there's curses, and then at the end of the game, if nobody minds spoilers about Seafall, you open the gates to hell, and I was not expecting that.
Oh.
So something like that is a legacy board game. It'll take multiple days for you to get through with your friends. It's not just you playing a single player video game and you experience it by yourself. You get to experience this whole story, forming it by yourself, naming characters yourself with your family. And I think that's really nice.
So this might fit the nice sort of gap between a video game that is a single player RPG and something long and drawn out like a tabletop RPG, which in both of our experiences takes years, multiple years. This could be something to bridge the gap between, this is a thing that you get to do with people, right, as opposed to a single player video game that is a little bit more cooperative than a multiplayer video game, but has a little bit more interpersonal connection where you're actually sitting across from the table from somebody and not sort of sitting beside them. There's a little bit more of a human element. I think there's a little bit more empathy that you can develop in tabletop RPG and a tabletop board game that maybe you don't get from video games.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've also discovered that with multiplayer video games, a lot of the time it'll just, unless the people playing it are very serious, it'll just kind of divulge into antics, and then the video game kind of gets left behind. But if you're playing a legacy board game, you kind of have to take your turn in character, and you have to make sure that you make the correct choices. You have to get the points for that game, and then that one section of the game, you'll be working towards the end goal that whole time.
Right. You don't ever get to sort of tune out of a board game.
Exactly, yeah. Because when you're playing a video game, you can play it as long as you want. But for a legacy game, the one game that you're playing for that campaign will be maybe like an hour, 2 hours long. And you have to just stick with that. And then maybe next week you play the next chapter.
Okay, cool. I like the idea of that, of being able to pull something out of a box that you can play for a while, that always has a little bit of like a segmented piece, a regimented thing that you do, where you don't kind of divulge into antics, which happens in tabletop RPGs if, you're playing for fun, and, board games when you're playing in that like online multiplayer world.
Exactly, because the other two legacy games that I've played, I just remember there was the Scythe legacy game, which was an absolute blast, and Charterstone and Seafall. Those are 3 incredible games, and I remember playing them because every single time we would open the box, I would go, what's going to happen now?
Yeah.
What is happening?
Yeah.
Anything could happen now, because in Charterstone, your souls get siphoned by the king, and it was like this really wholesome, like, build your village thing, and then they were like, no.
We're going to steal your soul. Crazy. Okay, cool.
So if I was to get a bit of an understanding from the conversation, if I was to take away a quick sentence for the differences of board games and why we might care about them, they kind of are a mixture of the more static rules you will get in video games, but also the more personal elements you often find from TTRPGs. Now, this is a very broad strokes, and there's as many exceptions to the rule as there are things that follow it. But would you say it's kind of an okay understanding of why people care about board games, like, in today?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have the time to get into every single difference between a basic board game and a video game, which is why I decided to put it to video games versus legacy games. Yeah. So that would be a really good, like, brushstroke for those differences as well. But, like, board games, video games are so different.
I think also in the past couple of years, in the same way we've seen kind of a renaissance in tabletop RPGs and our understanding of tabletop RPGs and just the immense amount of material that there is to consume now. I think we're kind of seeing that with board games too. Like, we started with something like Settlers of Catan, which just sort of took the idea of like a Monopoly board game or a Risk board game and was like, you could actually do something fun here, right? And we get into categories of like resource management games, and then we get to narrative games or something even like Wingspan, where it's like turn how would you describe Wingspan?
Oh, well, you're a bird, you're an ornithologist, and you're going around the world, you're collecting different birds in their studies, and you're putting them in your sanctuary to keep them safe.
Yeah, but you do this in a turn-based system that is like your first turn of a round has a specific resource management perspective to be able to accomplish that goal. And I think that comes from sort of that Catan era, right? When we talk about like the evolution of board games.
Well, if I could, with just a basic thing about board games is I've noticed that there are like 1 to 4 basic functions of a board game where you will have dice, you will have cards, you will have tracks, or you will have other.
What do you mean by a track? Do you mean like a little lane, like a point tracker kind of thing?
Something like that. But if
Okay.
I were to, I really like Tapestry. I don't know if you've heard of Tapestry, the board game.
I haven't.
It's freaking amazing. I played it while I was home recently, and I just had a blast with it. They have this specific function where on every side of the board there's a specific track. There's a science, exploration, technology, and military track.
Hey Gaia, that sounds a lot like Civ 6.
Don't get me started. We both know where this discussion goes. Half an hour of one of our first episodes is just Civ 6.
Yeah.
Well, it's similar to that, I suppose. But every turn you will spend a resource to advance on any of the tracks, and then as you go on them, you will get different resources to conquer the middle board, where you can like do tile placement. You will get technology and tapestry cards, where you can play them randomly, different spots. You have a city on your side where you put different buildings in. It's a fantastic, maybe complex mixture of almost every type of board game function there is. And I just think that it's a really good example of how how board games have evolved from
Yeah.
something like Settlers of Catan to something like that.
Right, to something where you can almost play a physical version of a video game.
Yeah, pretty much.
Hey, you know what comes to mind, actually? I know you've played this because I've seen it in your house. The Stardew Valley board game. Okay, I think I want to talk about it a little bit. I know I'm
okay.
getting some eyes in the studio here, but okay, we know Stardew Valley. We know and love Stardew Valley, right? Farming sim, a little bit of like some social interaction with NPCs, right? It's a very sweet little game. I don't actually know the history of how we even ended up with a board game of Stardew Valley. Was it a Kickstarter?
I don't know. I think
It was a Kickstarter.
There was a
Okay,
Kickstarter.
cool.
There was
Yeah.
a Kickstarter, I think.
I mean-
I'm gonna look it up while we talk.
I'm not surprised. Also, look up who made it because I'm curious.
It was Concerned Ape. I know
Yeah.
he was like one of the
Wait,
key
really?
elements.
Yeah, it is. His
He
logo's
played
on
a
the
huge
thing.
role on it.
Like
Yeah.
it wasn't like also a board game company.
There
Like,
was a
somewhere?
company involved, but I think it was more of a publishing. I'll go look this up while the conversation
Okay.
goes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't like the Stardew Valley board game.
Okay, please tell me about it, because this, I think, gets to the heart of our video game versus board game world.
I will also say that when I first played the Stardew Valley video game, I didn't like it. Only because it didn't tell me anything and I had no clue what was happening.
That's extremely reasonable. I have not gotten very far in Stardew Valley. I'm enjoying it a lot. Haven't gotten very far. I think I'm going to go buy the Stardew Valley guide
That's
And-
a good idea.
and do it
I am
again.
living with the Stardew Valley guide because I'm currently playing. I'm currently playing a
Yeah.
Stardew Valley game with Danny, my fiance.
Yes.
And they know things, so I'm
Yeah.
having a good time. I've gone
Excellent.
through the mine. I've done all the things, but the board game though.
Okay.
I looked up the rules. I read all the rules to the board game.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a book. First of all, it's like a whole book. There's too many things to do.
Okay.
You start at the farm, and then on your turn, you can go to any one of these locations to fish or mine or buy animals or sell things. You
Mm-hmm.
can't sell things just in general, I don't think.
Okay.
You might be able to sell things at the end of your turn, but to be able to get anything, you have to take an entire action. You get 2 actions per turn, so you'll go somewhere, you'll take an action there. So maybe you'll buy an animal, you'll buy a chicken
Right.
for like $10 because
Right.
everything's really hard to get money in that game.
Right.
And then you can choose to take another action in that location, so you can either upgrade your house or buy another animal, or you can move to another adjacent location, forage on the way to get a forage tile that you can sell, and then fish, mine, and then if you mine, you roll dice and you never get what you want, or you can fish and then you can roll dice and you never get what you want, and then you go back home and then your turn is wasted.
Oh.
And you get 1 year instead of 3 to finish, I think it was 10 separate goals, because you have to contribute to the community chests at the top
Yeah.
of the board, and you have to make Grandpa happy by filling out 3 of his requirements. There is
And you
so
have to make
much.
Grandpa happy as a board game, like like
You
mechanic
do.
is
He
really
gives you
fun.
quests, and you have to make him happy. And we got through, I don't even know how long. I think we got to fall of the 1 year we get, and we had completed maybe 2 things.
Yeah.
And I was so overwhelmed by choices and the inability to advance that I could not finish the game.
Are you competitive or collaborative?
You're collaborative. Everything about it is trying to, make Grandpa happy, finish the
Right.
community thing. It's a completely cooperative game.
So does each player have 10 things, or is it like the table has 10 things?
Each player they start with 3, and then you can, on your turn, you can get a fish or you can get resources, and then you sell them. They go into your personal store. But at the beginning of every round, you can share the resources. So
Oh,
you can
I was
all
talking
go
about
around and buy them.
objectives.
Oh, no. Everybody has 10 altogether.
Cool.
But the thing is, you need like 3 things to contribute for each of them.
Yeah, I can actually talk a little bit on this as well. In general, I think the game has like fixed game objectives, as well as each player has some degree of personal objectives, kind of. I did also look at the history while we were talking. There wasn't a Kickstarter. I couldn't find a Kickstarter. The game was made with Concerned Ape, as we all know, Eric Barone, I have to say it correctly, alongside a guy named Cole Medeiros, who goes by the online name of Mr. Jade. It looks like they were introduced by a mutual friend, and Cole was known for making board games. So when he met Concerned Ape and already had been playing Stardew Valley, they decided to collaborate. And I'm reading his dev diary as we go, and it looks like Concerned Ape knew a lot more about what type of game he wanted to create than Cole did, because like usually Cole would approach a game of, let's make a game we would want to play. And the first question that Concerned Ape asked him is, who's the target audience? And he just was completely thrown off by it. That's like one of the first paragraphs in his
Yeah.
dev diary. No, but I recall looking a lot into the Stardew Valley game. From what I've read, it is easily one of the hardest games you could possibly
Absolutely.
play. It feels a lot like in the video game doing the community center in year 1.
Yeah, because they only give you 1 year to do literally everything. If they
Yeah.
gave you 3 years, I would think it's possible. I would vaguely enjoy myself, but it's just, you can't do it with the
How-
amount of time they give you.
How long in real time does that 1 year take?
Oh, I think it was about
A while.
Like, yeah,
It goes
takes
well
forever.
above an hour.
Yeah,
I think it's like I haven't played too much, so don't get me wrong. I think it's about an hour per season for 4 seasons. So you could play. I think you can play it in 2 hours easy, but I
If
think
you know what
4
you're doing.
hours is like the standard, especially for new players.
Yeah.
It took us way longer because we had to read the rule book, and I
Mm-hmm.
had to explain the rule book, and you also had to, and your first time setup, you have to punch out the 80,000 tiles and then put them in their specific spots, and you
Yeah.
go, there's too many things here.
That was me opening Everdell and seeing like a whole bunch of little like resource pieces, and I was like, well, I want to eat all of them, but I don't know what they're for.
There are
Yeah.
so many more than Everdell in,
Oh.
in the Stardew
Oh, dear.
board game. Like, there's,
They are all forbidden snacks.
they are all forbidden
Well,
snacks.
okay, have you played Everdell?
I have not.
Okay, it's
Oh
this,
my God, you have
okay,
to play
You have
Everdell.
to play Everdell, but the thing that makes them so fundamentally edible is that you play as a little woodland creature. Sorry, I've killed Gaia.
I can't handle the term fundamentally edible.
They are.
The thing that
They're
makes them
really
so
good.
fundamentally edible.
Look, Gaia, the thing that makes them so fundamentally edible is that each piece for the resource thing is like a proper little plastic object, right? It's not a token that you punch, it's a little thing. And because you play as a woodland creature, one of these resources is berries, okay? And they are made of like rubber or silicone or something like kind of squishy. So when you're looking at it, you're like, that's just a piece of candy. Like, I would not show that to a child without like it super glued to my fingers. Like, it looks edible.
The resin as well.
Yeah, the resin
It
looks like a snack.
Like a rock candy or something.
Yeah, it looks
You
like a
just-
little like crystal like sugar thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, they're really good. I think this brings us to a really good point of like, we've talked about tutorials in video games. We've talked about how to introduce players to tabletop RPGs. We just did a whole session on session zeros and that sort of consent checklists and where do you start when you're talking about themes? How do you bring new players on board? That kind of thing.
How do you do the first few minutes of a video game or the first few minutes of a TTRPG?
Okay.
Yeah, we've talked about like what makes a good hook in a story. I even read. I know you've read the book. I've read the first line of Gideon on air. Just
the first line.
Just the first line because it's a really good hook because
That's
it
true.
it does the juxtaposition of like high language with low language, and it's kind of fun. What would you say about board games that develops that hook? Because in my experience, you buy a new game because you're like, I think I like the theme. I think the box art is kind of fun.
Oh, yeah.
And then you open it and it's like, now learn about something.
Now you have to read.
Now read. And in my family, it tends to be everybody else is going to go gather snacks and like finish off what they're doing. And I'm going to read the rule book and then I'm going to do my very best to try to explain what I've just read to you, which is, kind of cool. It means that I understand what's happening.
Yeah, and then you have to explain it in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not a great like hook for a story. Is there a game that does that better? Do you think there's a better way of unboxing a board game, or a better way of doing an instruction manual?
Basically, how do you successfully hook someone into a board game? You have 5 minutes. How do you make someone want to play?
Okay, am I doing this to like any board game? Because I have one idea.
Yeah, you can
about-
pick your favorite if you want.
It's not my favorite.
Either a good example or a set of general rules, whatever approach you want to take.
Okay, well, the first thing that came to mind is one of the most complicated and difficult board games that I know of, which is the Dark Souls board game. When you open...
I'm sorry, there's a Dark Souls board
There
game?
is, and it has minis in it, and it's really hard.
Do you have it?
No, because it's really expensive.
Okay, I'm
But
sorry.
I
Continue.
played it at a board game cafe, and when you open it for the very first time, the only thing you see is a large black square that says "You died,"
Oh, excellent.
just to
Okay,
get you prepared
that's a
for what's
fun-
going to happen.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, now I want to learn this game.
Okay, that's very on brand for Dark Souls. Like,
You know exactly what's happening. You're a few seconds in. You got it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then you play it, and then you die a lot. We did not win. We lost horribly. We didn't even get to the first boss.
Okay, I like the idea of. Okay, it's very strong thematically.
Yes.
Okay, so if I was going to design a board game, I would say that like cool box art with fun thing that is thematic to the game, and then you open it, and there should be a strong statement with what you see first.
Not necessarily. I just found that was entertaining because it gave an air of comedy. So
Okay.
it made me endeared to the board game.
Right.
So Everdell has like a whole story built into it. It didn't originally, but I discovered that when you get one of the expansions, I don't remember which one it is, but my parents bought the huge box that has every single expansion in it and every single rule book. In there, they have a little notebook that when you open it, all it has is just the last 100 years of Everdell, the city, and everything that happened in each year.
Oh, that's fun.
It's like it's founded, and then this bakery started, and then this bank started, and then it just keeps going, and then it's really good because it's a celebration of the 100-year anniversary of Everdell, the city.
Oh,
and now
okay,
you have
cool.
the whole history of what's been going on.
Yeah.
Then with the expansions on that, they also have heroes, and they have different clock towers, and all of the characters have little bits on them. But it's just the story of Everdell is very cute. It's
Yeah.
very adorable.
It's definitely the kind of thing that I pick up when I'm like, I want to just not be here right now. I want to just play cards with my friends and look at a little paper tree.
Yeah, fair
Yeah.
enough. I think what brings people hooked into most board games is the art on the box.
Yeah.
Because like Everdell for that, Living Forest, Ankh, I was immediately in love with all of those things.
Scythe for me was like that.
Scythe,
Yeah.
yeah.
I had followed the artist. The name is escaping me at the moment, but the artist who does all of the work for Scythe, I had followed a lot of his art. I
Oh.
have, I don't have prints of it, but I have like wallpapers of his stuff, and I'm like following him on whatever website he might be on. And then I saw the art, and I was like, oh, that looks like somebody I really enjoy. Like that board game could be cool.
Yeah.
And I picked it up, and it was his work. So
And it's a really good board game.
that's a really good board game.
So I'm hearing you should judge a book by its cover.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely, you should.
100%.
Although I've also said that I've seen this game Fog of Love, which is a 2-player game. I think it's like, I'm thinking of 2 different ones. There's Fog of Love and then there's Time Stories. They both are almost pure white boxes, and that stands out. I look at that and I'm like, oh, what's that game about? And then
Yeah.
Fog of Love is 2-player for like a partner, like 2 partners to play a game, and Time Stories you like go through time and save people. But I was going to bring up Forbidden Island.
Okay.
Because Forbidden Island is a good example of something that looks like a good game because it's got a metal tin and it's got an island, a forbidden island on the cover.
Sure, okay.
But the whole story about it is you and your friends have been stranded on this island, and you all have to take a little, like a class, I guess, of like this is your specialty, and then you try to collect pieces to escape the island. That's a good way of being. This is the story of the game, and this is how you should be going forward with this, and things like that. But that's less story hook and more just this is how the game works.
Right. So what I'm hearing is maybe that a story hook for a board game should tell you something about how to play the game, right? It kind of sounds like or maybe set an expectation, right? When you open the Dark Souls board game, it's like you died. You're like, okay, I'm gonna die a lot.
Yeah.
That's okay, right? And I think with Everdell, you know when you open the box that this isn't a game that's like super competitive, right? You know that this is going to be a calm little
Depends
game.
on who you play with.
Well, that's a very good point, but this is going to be a pretty chill little game, right? And when you open Forbidden Island, you know that you're going to have a specialty. You're going to be focused on one particular thing.
And the stakes are there. You could die.
You could die. I think that sets you up really well for understanding what a game is like.
Exactly.
And if I may jump in, I've learned a lot from board games that it's inescapable, not unescapable, that you're going to be stuck with probably the worst possible tutorial that exists because you have to read a text block. And we already condemned text blocks in our tutorial episode for video games.
I was literally just going to make an analogy between like when you read the instructions and then are the person who explains it to the rest of the table. That is essentially like being a tutor, is reading the textbook and then explaining it to another person.
You're right.
Yep. So board games fundamentally have that issue, but I'm hearing the first 5 minutes is usually a unique standout design. Doesn't have to be the most interesting or beautiful design. It has to be unique and stand out, and usually a good story or a good kind of narrative hook to kind of get someone into it, or it's something interesting within the game that makes them want to play. That's kind of
Yeah.
what I'm getting from the hook.
A lot of the rule books as well is like before you even get into like reading all the rules and everything, they will like not all of the games, but a large number of board games that I've got will have on the first page a paragraph, usually in italics, telling you the story of where you are, who you are, what's been going on, here's what you're going to do, and then they tell you the rules. So you can read that whole paragraph and then think, okay, now I'm invested in this world, I know what I want to do, now I know what to expect, and now I have to figure out how it works.
plays a lot more similarly to the book world, which we had discussed a
Yeah.
lot, than necessarily the video game world in
yeah,
that way.
Yeah, because
There
then
is-
you're given a story and characters.
There is something I hadn't considered about board games, something really kind of fun in learning that, in understanding it, in puzzling out how to play, and then in trying to figure out what the best way to play is.
Yeah.
Like in my experience when I sit down, because I usually play board games with my family, we will play the first round kind of discussing out loud strategies. We'll be like, I'm going to try collecting this. I'm going to try doing this thing, right? And we all try like a slightly different strategy, or we'll go, oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to try to do that here. And then one person will win, and we'll see how points tally up, and we'll see sort of what strategy worked. And then in the next game, we're all coming in with a like, I have a strategy now, and I think I understand how this game works because we've tested it. And I think that's part of the joy of it for me, is that you get to really kind of like play with the rules, like because you know they're there, but you get to mold your own strategy.
That does
Yeah.
bring me right back to Tapestry, because most of the time in Tapestry you will be able to get to the end of one of the 4 to 5 tracks. And depending on how you do that track or how the rest of your game goes, like each track will specialize in one thing, and they're all vastly different. So then we get to see the person who went to the end of the science track. How did they get so many points? How did they get not so many points? What do they do to get what they have? It's usually just, my mom is just, no matter what track she goes on, she's just like, oh, I'm winning,
Yeah.
I don't know how I did it. But that really helps with the strategies. You go, these are the different things I could be doing, which one's the best? And I do like trying to figure that out and strategizing for board games. It's a lot of fun.
So if I can bring some organization to that type of discussion, when talking a lot about video games, we really hit a lot of key design elements. We hit the idea of tutorials, of the idea of the depth of a game versus how complex the game has to be to achieve that depth. We talked about reward systems, using the environment to tell stories. That's like a list of our first few episodes. Now, these are a lot of video game specific design elements that you can use to make a game better or worse to think about. So from your perspective, if you had to think of a few key things that someone designing a board game would have to be thinking about to make a good game, what would be some of the more important things? Even this could also be for players. If they're trying to identify a good or bad game, it's like, I like the reward system. I like
Yeah.
the progression system. How should people be thinking about these types of things?
We've often framed this show as a way to communicate to your friends why you like something, right? It's really easy to talk about a video game and just go, I like it, you should play it. But if you want to be more specific about it, and I could say to you, I really like this game because the tutorial sucks you in the first 5 minutes and makes you feel successful, that's a much different understanding than saying, oh, I like it because I die a lot. Like,
That's fair.
right? So what would you say are some tools that you could use to discuss board games, and how they hook you in?
Well, this will be a lot of my personal decisions,
Absolutely.
of course.
That's why
All
you're
of
here.
our previous discussions were too. Don't worry.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I will bring it back to Everdell because
Beautiful.
we're already there. My main things that I love the most about Everdell are the theme. So I'm a very big fan of the overarching, very beautiful forest-like theme. I really enjoy that. And from a gameplay standpoint, everybody has their hand of cards. You get to play those cards. Nobody else gets to play those cards. You have control over that. Your strategy cannot be stolen from you, which can get very frustrating in the wrong time. That kind of thing is very helpful for enjoying a game in general. But if you were to go to other specifics, I am a very big fan of having an overarching theme. So for a smaller game, I recently learned about this game called Lucidity, which is you
A
are all...
fantastic name for a game.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
You're all dreaming, and then you are trying to roll dice, and you get certain things that mean different things. But the overarching reason is that you do not want to get too much hunt, where you will just die,
Okay.
or get too much shadow and become a nightmare. And if you become a nightmare, then other players you will have more abilities that you can use against people. That, again, the whole theme. I like the QT theme of Everdell, I like the horror theme of Lucidity. I would like the whole thing to be consistent and be that way. Personally, Lucidity is a dice game. I don't like dice. I don't like dice, because dice, they don't do what you want them to do.
Okay. Yeah.
Dice, if I get anything that has to do with random chance, I will fail. I will just fail.
Yeah.
So you're a
it's-
strategy player.
I'm a
it's
strategy player.
really
heavily.
hard to play a strategy game or to play any kind of strategy in a game that is based around like probability.
Yes.
Insert a 1 hour discussion about Catan here.
Absolutely. That, Ankh.
Yeah.
I'll bring it to Ankh. because it's imagine Risk, but with Egyptian gods. You have little regions.
I'm ready.
You play as one of the gods,
Yeah.
and then your plan is to...
Is there like a place where I can capture Australia and just sort of hoard that for points?
No, sorry.
Dang.
It's just Egypt. There's no Australian gods, I don't think.
Oh.
But you get a region, you are assigned a god, and then your plan is to conquer all of Egypt and have that be who you are.
Okay.
And something that's very good about it is that the instructions are clear. Like there's a few phases you can go through that you can take one of 4 actions a turn. And those are simple, move, take over a monument, like things like that. You just simple, this is what you do on your turn. And that really helps because then people who don't play a lot of board games like me would be like, oh, I can do that. I'll just move my figure over here. And then that means that I'm here and I can do this now. You can
Cool.
summon, you can get like people and all that. Just very basic rules.
Right.
And then once you get enough actions done by people, then you go into the conflict phase. So you have enough time with those basic actions to understand them before something new is introduced. Because every so often you'll get events that will introduce camels, which will separate regions so you have more things. And yes?
Hey, what's this reminding you of?
I see you have a look in your eyes. What is it?
It's the tutorial episode. We've talked about the idea of like gradual introduction of new concepts, right?
Yeah.
Here's press
It
A to
works.
jump, and now you can jump and swing. Yeah.
I'm hearing actually a lot of that in our discussion of like a good board game is built on a good tutorial, a good
Yeah.
introduction, like the make it or break it point from the sounds of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to go off topic.
Go. Do it.
With the discussion of video game versus board game, they're following the same basic rules. You want somebody to buy your product, you want somebody to enjoy your product and understand your product, and then tell tell other people about your product. It's the same basic like marketing schemes, I guess, but they're also like, we want you to enjoy this because it's good, it's fun, you understand it, it's got a good theme, it's got a good story. They're very similar. It's just they're slightly different because one of them is physical in your hands.
Basically a mechanical difference rather than strictly a thematic difference.
Yeah, pretty much. That's kind of how I would see this whole discussion, is that they're just thematical differences. It depends on your theme of what you want to play.
That actually opens a question I've been wanting to ask pretty much this entire episode so
Sure.
far. I've noticed between books and movies, we see this kind of false comparison a lot, where they're very different, and though they're based on the same core principle, comparisons between them are very difficult because you can't watch a book, right? And movies are limited. And I think I've noticed this a lot, even within my own discussion between board games and video games. I try very hard to compare them, but they do have fundamental differences. So what's your opinion on this constant comparison between board games and video games, or this attempt to turn board games into video games or turn video games into board games? Do you think this is like a net positive, or do you think we're doing a disservice to one of them like that?
I wouldn't say there's a disservice, but I also wouldn't think that a comparison between board games and video games is necessary. Because with books and movies as well, they're just different. They're just completely different. They don't need to be compared to each other. It'll depend on what you want to consume at the time. If you have the time and energy to read an entire book over the course of like a couple of months, go for it. You get that story. If you just want to sit down for a couple hours, watch a movie, play a board game, then there you go. You've got that whole thing just condensed for you for that one day. It's a personal opinion. You don't need to compare them. We don't need to do anything like too similar like that. But I do like the idea of, sorry, I have to swallow, of moving from a book to a movie, because if you're like me, I don't have the time or energy to read a whole book anymore, but books still have incredible stories. I would like to see the story on a movie because I have time for 2.5 hours. I can do that. Video games to board games. It's a little bit more confusing because with...
There's a lot that happens in a video game that I think is difficult to replicate as like a physical medium. And I think that's part of the reason that we play a video game.
Exactly.
Right? Is because it isn't in this realm of physicality.
You go into another world and you get to be escapism for a little while.
Yeah, you lack the escapism as much.
Yes.
Yeah.
You never get to play solidly a character when you're playing a board game. Even if you're playing alone or with like automas, which are like replacement people,
Yeah.
then you're still just kind of you rolling dice. If
Yeah,
you're playing a video game, you're like, oh, I'm Link now. I'm a ha.
You're not just
slash.
you pressing buttons in a
Yeah.
video game.
Yeah.
I do feel that between like video games and with tabletop RPGs, I always feel a little bit more connected to the person I'm playing or the person I'm embodying, much more so than a movie or a board game.
Yeah, exactly. And with the board game versus TTRPG, you get to build your character in the role-playing game. You get to be this person. In a video game, you are a character that somebody else has written. So you don't get it as intensely.
So I did have another question on the same idea. It seems really common within like the film book area of saying it's this book, the movie, or it's this movie, the book. And I've started to see this with board games. The Settlers of Catan, the video game, which is just the board game on the screen, but also like Stardew Valley, the board game. Dark Souls, the board game. I'm seeing this everywhere. Do you think this is a good thing as it brings people to the market and can make like create more players and give more interesting ideas? Or do you think this joining of those industries is ultimately harmful? This thing I've been wondering for months. I just wanted a chance to get more opinions on it.
I'm not an expert. I would say that it's not necessarily harmful. I also wouldn't say it's necessarily necessary, because it's a video game. If you have Dark Souls, the video game, somebody thought, oh, I could just make that into a board game and make money, you know? But I don't think it's pushing anybody to play the Dark Souls video game or play the Dark Souls board game. It might be good to get people into board games that way.
I was just thinking it might be the kind of thing where like, hey, you've been playing Dark Souls, by yourself in your mom's basement. Like, just as a broad, none of us actually do that, but, like the idea of like you've been alone doing something and you want to share some of that with a friend. It's really difficult to sit down with somebody and be like, why don't you sit here while I play this game and I'll show you why I like it, because that's a really hard thing to share.
That is
I
true.
do that all the time, and people just never. It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It's really hard to communicate that, right? Even if you're like, look, I can do a cool backflip. Like, they're not getting the same tactile experience that you are. But
That is true.
To say, I have a theme that I want to share with you, right? I really like this game because I really like the art of it. I really like the story. I like the way it's framed. Would you come sit down with me and we'll play the board game version of it, and maybe you can then come play the video game with me? That's a very different way to introduce somebody to a video game.
That is true. It goes back to why I believe board games are very important, is that you get to play them with people. You get to enjoy this story together. So yeah, actually, if somebody really likes Dark Souls and then they're like, oh, there's a board game, I can show people why I like it. There we go. That's fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
they'll have a terrible time because it's a hard game, but they will still have a good time because they're with their friends.
Yeah, they'll have a hard time having a bad time, which they're very familiar with if they've played Dark Souls.
That's true. The only problem is I would hope that they don't get too familiar with how Dark Souls the game is played, like the video game, and then they try to play the board game like the video game and they go, that's not right.
Yeah.
I think you have to realize, I'm playing a board game.
Yeah.
And I think you do. When you sit down at a table with friends, fundamentally you have changed something about how you approach a game.
There's an environmental difference.
Definitely.
Yeah. See, my biggest worry with all these video games becoming board games was that it would become the shovelware epidemic that we used to have within the video game realm forever ago. There'd be a lot of cheap board games that aren't worth playing that could muddy the market. But the more that I play these video game board games, the more I realize these are amazing, unique ideas that are really fun. The Stardew Valley board game is my favorite example. I've been wanting to play that for so long, and it looks so cool. But I've also played the game Twilight Struggle, which is a amazing board game if you haven't had the chance to play it. And you will spend 6 hours purely strategizing as two players on opposite sides of the Cold War. Amazing board game. It's also
wow.
really expensive.
Yeah.
Because it's not a fight. It's you're trying to influence countries and influence their governments so they'll side with you in the Cold War so you can win the Cold War.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Incredibly fascinating game. I highly recommend if you haven't had the chance.
Absolutely, that'd
There's
be
a
great.
video game version of it which is just the board game on a screen.
Yeah.
That's it. Which is it's worth it. It's like it's like $5 instead of the 70. I recommend.
I think there's also something to be said about just when you take literally a board game and you go make a video game version of it that isn't, you don't take
It's
a
a
board game and
one-to-one
you go,
adaptation, yeah.
exactly. I'm gonna go play Settlers of Catan online with my online friends. I think that's a good just way to spend time with people that you
Yeah.
don't see face to face a lot.
Well, there's a whole website called Tabletopia or Board Game Arena. They have preset board games like Seven Wonders and Wingspan. They just have those pre-built, pre-coded, so you can just play the game with your friends who are not in the same city. I I had a point, and now it's gone.
Oh, well, I have another point, which is just to say that, there's something to be said for that, for just like the portability of a board game versus like anything that you play online.
True.
Right? I can pull that up on my phone, so long as it doesn't work with Flash, and still have a similar experience, but that is different too.
Yeah.
I
a
have
board
so
game.
many chess apps.
Yeah.
I think it's very important to have, like with Settlers of Catan, you can't really do anything between the board game and the video game that's going to be 1-to-1, because it's
Yeah.
Settlers of Catan.
Yeah.
But if you're going from Dark Souls to Dark Souls, video game to board game, it's important that they be different. They should not be the exact same experience. The buttons shouldn't do the same thing. The cards shouldn't do the same thing. They should be fundamentally different enough that they are unique and
Yeah.
still have the same theme.
If you're going to make a video game, why are you making a video game of it if the board game was just as good?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're or vice versa, if you're going to be making a board game, make sure that it's a board game and not just the video game on paper.
Yeah, we made the video game, but I made punch tokens. Have
Yeah.
fun.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
I made yourself some minis. I bet you're happy now.
So I'm going to throw another hard question your way.
Oh, boy.
I think all the questions I've asked have been these massive, overarching, very difficult things to answer. And this one is not going to be as overarching.
Oh.
What, in your opinion, is the worst part about playing board games? Because we've talked a lot about these goods and how great, or not, sorry, yeah, board games. We've talked a lot about the good things about board games, a lot of the aspects that are very positive, but there are things that stop people from choosing to play board games. So if you had to pick one, maybe two of those things.
My worst thing about board games is the edibility of the pieces. I just want to eat them.
I did once see a whole thing that was just like, oh, here are the top 5 edible board games, and I have played all of them.
I
Gaia,
am actively going to search that up.
I need you to look me directly in the eyes when I tell you this.
Yep.
We played Wingspan, okay? Which is a game about collecting birds, and part of it is that you collect eggs to hatch birds from, okay? I kid you not, that we had a bowl of mini eggs on the table. The amount of times I reached for a board game piece to eat instead of a mini egg, ridiculous. Like, they look exactly the same.
do.
Like,
It's
so
dangerous.
dumb. It's really scary. Like,
Okay.
Sorry.
Continue with some of the downfalls, pitfalls of board games while I go look up that top 5 most edible board games list.
Okay, fantastic. The first thing that comes to mind is that to play a board game successfully, you need to, like a TTRPG, get all of your friends together at the same time. And they all have to be...
it's always adult scheduling.
It's always adult scheduling. They have to be all together at the same time. They all have to enjoy the game. They all have to be willing to learn the game. That is very difficult. And
Yeah,
especially
really
if...
hard to find a good headspace where you're like, I'd like to optionally learn something.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I'm going to learn a whole new thing today. Sometimes it's for like a simple board game, but I was going to say random chance, but that's just me. Like, I agree that random chance is very important for dice for many games, but I just
I think video games also use random chance
They do.
to a very
Yeah.
high
They
amount.
do, yeah.
So it's not a particularly board game pitfall.
Yeah, that's just my
I-
personal
I agree.
grievance.
I'm a strategy player. I play like Civ 6 or Age of Empires. Like I shy away from randomness.
also don't really like being introduced with a random chance to a game where I'm like, I have an idea about how I want to play this, but there's some element that's going to screw it up for me.
Exactly. I was
Yeah.
playing this game Destinies, which is like, it's like a board game D&D, but like dumbed down. You're given a character, and then you have to complete your goal before everybody else does. I had gotten to the point to get my goal like 5 rounds before everybody else, and I just kept rolling failures.
Yeah.
And then I lost the game because of that.
If
It's
your-
frustrating.
This is when we've talked about in tabletop RPGs, if your plot hinges around somebody rolling well, you haven't written a good plot.
Yes.
If I have written a murder mystery and you walk into a room and don't roll a high enough investigation check or perception check to find the secret button under the desk, like,
And that's the
and,
only
and
way to
that's
solve
the only
it.
way to solve it, we're not getting anywhere.
Game's over now.
Right? And
Yeah.
I think the same thing is true with a board game, right? If you hit a point where a dice roll is going to be the thing that makes or breaks the game, like, you've kind of got an element of like tense excitement maybe if you've got like a good competitive edge against somebody else, but otherwise it's just kind of frustrating.
It's just yeah.
Yeah.
That was a very specific example. A lot of games use dice very effectively, and this isn't like every die. Like, a lot of games use random chance to a good degree, and they're fantastic. God, other downfalls? You give me a really hard question. I really like
I
board
haven't
games.
given you a single easy question.
I like board games, man.
I think board games are great. I love board games, but if I had to give my opinion on the hardest difficulty board games face, it's portability. Right?
Oh, yeah,
the
they're
inability to bring them around to other places.
I gotta tell you, the first game that my family ever picked up that introduced us to the whole brand new world of board games was a card game called, I'm gonna say it wrong, Squirrels, which is, it's supposed to be sort of a portmanteau of the word squirrels and quarrels.
Squirrels.
So you fight as squirrels. So the idea is that, like, it's I'm serious. You get a hand of cards, and they are acorns. They're like they're just numbers of acorns on a card. And then there's some special ones, like there's a golden acorn and a rotten acorn. And the whole thing is that you have to get 4 of a kind to be able to hoard them for winter, which is to stack them away into your scoring pile.
Your scoring pile?
Your scoring pile. And then the end of the game is triggered by just a card that says winter on it. And I kid you not, my family played, like, so much of this game that I can picture what the arrangement of all the acorns on each different number card. And it's just, like, super simple, very portable, very fun, and super, like, quick to pick up and easy to learn.
Absolutely. Well, that's a whole genre of games. Like, my family's been taking games to airports all the time. There's Zombie Dice, Martian Dice, Chupacabra, Dead Man's Sea, I think, and, like, Yahtzee. Just very small, extremely simple dice and or card games.
I think one of my favorite genre of sort of portable board games is the let's play something while we're in this restaurant until our food arrives.
Exactly.
It's the sit down, okay, we know what we want, we're going to order. What can we play at the table right now that is going to be easy to pack up, like easy to put down and play, not a whole lot of setup time?
Yeah.
I'm not going to set up Scythe when I'm ordering my pasta. Like,
I'm not going to set up Twilight Struggle, which takes like an hour to set up.
yeah, exactly.
There's Talisman, you have like 18 boards.
Yeah.
Oh my god. I would add, though, that with the advent of board games kind of just being one-to-one ported onto computers to play at a distance, the portability problem of a lot of board games is disappearing very quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've been able to play way more board games now by loading Tabletop Simulator on my
Exactly.
computer.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So I think some of the biggest problems that board games are facing are being cured for the most part. Overall.
Especially with Board Game Arena and Tabletopia, they have things, they have Monopoly, they have, I think some of them had Scythe. Like, they have huge games that you can just play on your computer. Just with your friends, either local or in another province. It's fantastic.
90% of the time, the people who uploaded them to the game are just random users who want to enjoy games with their friends anyway. So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
pulling back to the open source community question.
I think one of the things, though, that I do really enjoy about board games is that it makes me put my phone away and I'm not staring at a screen. Like, it brings me back into the physical world of, like, hey, I'm going to sit down with you and enjoy your company without having to sit down and talk about what's happening in our outer lives or our inner lives. Like, we can just sit there and just sort of exist in a comfy way.
Yeah.
You know, which is interacting with a game, right?
Yeah.
And laughing about, like, oh, I'm going to eat this board game piece. Like,
I was recently introduced to this game called Arc Nova, where you, it's like a 4-hour game. This game takes freaking forever, but the whole concept of it is you're building a zoo. So you can get sponsorships and you can get associations with universities and other continents, and you get to play animals, and it's just a blast.
Oh,
you
excellent.
just talk to your friends and your family, and you're like, oh, I wanted that animal. Like, look at this. I'm like a primate. You've been grappled. You've been
Yeah.
poisoned. It's great. It's just a lot of fun to just talk about random stuff for a couple hours.
I think it also it doesn't make you, like, it focuses you on the game, but it also doesn't put you in the kind of space that a tabletop RPG does, where you really have to be involved in what's happening. And if
Yeah.
you sort of diverge away from that, you know, we get stuck over there for a while.
Yeah,
right? It's
like-
really hard to refocus a tabletop RPG.
And it's also a lot more high stress,
Yeah.
in my opinion, because it takes a lot more. Well, it takes spoons. It takes a lot of spoons.
A lot of spoons.
And like mental ability and physical ability. You have to be sitting there for a while. You have to think through all of your actions. You have to think about what your character was going to do.
Yeah.
In a board game, you're just,
You're
I'm
just
just
there.
going to do this
Yeah,
on my
and,
turn.
and you know that your turn is going to come up at some point. Right?
Yeah.
It's really easy to take yourself as an individual out of a tabletop RPG by just being, you know, not present. And then
Yeah.
suddenly you're just sitting at a table, you know, looking at something.
Exactly. Like everybody in a board game will get their turn.
Yeah.
That's also another very important part.
So, we're coming into about our last 5 minutes now. So, to use these last 5 minutes to give an opportunity,
You're going to give me another really hard question.
No, actually, I'm going to do the easiest question. I'll say it's the easiest. So we've talked about what makes a good board game. It's all about an early hook. It's all about a good design, engaging mechanics, and basically picking a solid theme. I heard a lot of theme today. Well, we
like
never
themes.
said it. We never said it too directly, but it's all about having a good theme. Every game you listed knew what they wanted and went for it.
Well, I think
So-
the other thing, sorry, just to add on right here, the other thing about theme is that it's really easy to say what you like, right?
Yeah.
I really like ships. If there's a board
I
game
love
about
cats.
yeah, if there's a board game about cats, you're gonna play it. If there's a board game about ships, I'm gonna play it. If there's a board game about I was gonna say chess, Gaia. I looked at you, thought if there's a board game about chess, Gaia's gonna play it.
Oh, well, if I had introduced you to Queen's Gambit, the board game.
So, with the last few minutes, here's the question to give both of you.
Okay.
What would you say is one of your favorite board games that you wish you could talk about more?
Talisman. I adore Talisman. It was one of my very first board games that I fell in love with. It has one big board, and it has about 10 expansions, where there's 4 other boards that you can buy that go in the corners that give you new realms to explore, new cards, new people to play. Every single person that you play as, you get a little character card, you get lives, you get strength, you get craft to fight things with, you collect objects, you collect followers, you get a roleplay story, you get abilities, and they come with minis. And it was awesome. That's where I first started painting minis, was Talisman. And I haven't gotten to play it because it takes like 6 hours to play. Because you collect cards until you're quote unquote strong enough to go up into the middle and then you win the game. It's just such a good game. It just takes so long, both to set up and to play, but I love it. It's so good. I love it, and nobody I know plays it except my parents because they introduced me to it.
Yeah. I feel like your parents are the kind of people who have like a walk-in closet that's board games.
Our entire basement is wall-to-wall board games.
Excellent.
You would lose it.
Built in. Can I visit your parents' house?
Yeah.
I didn't have anything to say. That was just an excitement gasp.
Oh, I was going to say, what is your favorite board game you wish you could talk about more?
Hey, controversial to all of these legacy games. You know what I want to talk about more is Block Us.
I've played it. It's good.
I've played it.
Like, look, it's good. It's easy. It's fast. Like, I can't tell you the amount of times that my parents have
I'm
made
a
the
really big fan of this new thing, Scrabble.
I can't tell you the amount of times my parents have made the joke about like, wow, I just want to break this. I'm like, it's just always so fun because it's, you know, it's always a little bit different, but it's not too different enough to make you like, you know, like not understand what's happening. It's a good game.
It's nice.
And
It's a
it
good
makes
game.
it makes a good sound. Gaia, please take us away from this
we-
old game.
We all know that I've talked all day today about Twilight Struggle. I highly
Yeah.
recommend it. It's on my computer screen. I'm flipping it around for my co-host. I am a huge fan of Twilight Struggle. For those of you who are looking for a good strategy game themed around the Cold War and John F. Kennedy for some reason,
Sorry, I'm just a big fan of that picture where everything is blank and then it's like USA.
yep. Soviet Union has that too, but it's covered by a card. Oh, great game, amazing strategy game. 1 billion edible pieces.
Yeah.
If you lose a single one of them, the game gets much harder. They are all necessary.
I think also
amazing
if you're going to
game.
design a board game, you should have, like, if I lose a piece of it, I should still be able to play the game.
It comes with a few
There's
extras.
extras,
thankfully.
No. I'm saying, like, in just, like, board game design generally. Like, if I lose, like, one piece, I should be able to just replace it with, like, something I have on hand.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like, it shouldn't be so, you know, like, oh, gosh, I can't find the one thing that lets us finish this game.
Like Mousetrap.
Yeah, it shouldn't be like a
Oh, like
puzzle.
Mousetrap.
Yeah, it shouldn't
Oh,
be
like
a
Mousetrap.
Mousetrap. I don't think I've ever seen a complete set of Mousetrap. I'm
Yeah,
not
I
gonna
had
lie.
it.
Game at Valley Village.
Yeah.
I've had it before and then I lost.
I lost one piece.
Or like Operation, I think. Is
Yeah.
Operation's
a
pretty
bo-
bad for
is it
that.
a
Yeah,
board game?
yeah, it counts.
Sure,
It's
I
a
guess.
game with a board on a table. Board game.
It's kind of a game in a board if you really think about it.
Yeah, board game, game board. So I think that covers pretty much everything that we have today. So any last comments from anyone here?
Another bad thing about board games is that you will always put them away and then you will find a piece that you forgot on the floor.
There's one currently in one of the offices I use on campus
Oh, no.
from someone who no longer goes here.
There's the other bad thing about board games is that I want to play more of them, and I look at them on my shelf all the time and go, man, that's super pretty. I want to play it, and I never do.
They also cost like
Come over to my
$70.
house.
They're so expensive.
Yes,
Yeah,
they're
that's the
so
other thing.
expensive. There's this game ISS Vanguard. It looks beautiful. It's like $250.
That's too
So
much for a
expensive.
game.
Too much. But anyways, that covers everything. I've been Gaia,
I've been Vi.
I've been David.
and we'll see you all next time. Thanks for listening. And if you want to hear more from us or listen to past episodes, tune in live every Thursday at 9 p.m. Atlantic on CHSR 97.9 FM in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And if you're online, you can listen live at chsrfm.ca or on your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you next time.